Fox News, once again, is trying to take on Bernie Sanders.
There's no getting around it. The media just aren't taking Bernie Sanders seriously. Now, on the surface, that might seem flat wrong. After all, the Vermont senator is suddenly getting all kinds of attention, stories in major newspapers, television coverage as he draws big crowds in places like Madison, Wisconsin, as he raised $15 million in the last quarter, about a third of Hillary Clinton's haul, and as he obviously seems to be tapping into something and resonating with the liberal base of the Democratic Party. A guy who was initially viewed as a kind of a fringe candidate, a 73-year-old socialist with no hope of making a serious showing, is shaking things up quite a bit. Here's why I say media not taking him seriously. Because if we were treating Sanders as anything other than entertainment, we would be holding him to a lot tougher standard. The things that he says, which obviously warm liberal hearts, when he talks about, a huge increase in taxes, when he talks about breaking up the big banks, when he talks about a single-payer Medicare-like healthcare system for everybody. Now, if we really thought this guy could be the Democratic nominee, those kinds of positions will be subject to a lot of media analysis and scrutiny. But go beyond that. These freelance articles that he wrote, some of them 40 years ago, in which Bernie Sanders says things like, cancer is caused by not having enough orgasms, that a lack of sex can lead to cancer, leaving aside the earlier blip over his writing about female sexual fantasies involving gang rape and that sort of thing. Yes, it was 30, 40 years ago, but imagine any other candidate in the race, any of the 42 Republican candidates in the race, having once written that, what a bombshell that would have been. So, bottom line here is there are also other weaknesses in Bernie Sanders' candidacy that are not really being looked at very hard, except for a couple of stories, such as he has virtually no following in the African American community. He represents a pretty predominantly white state. And doesn't have much black support in his campaign, nor does he seem to be reaching out to those communities. Here's what's really going on. The press doesn't want to spoil the fun. We want to cover Bernie as a kind of phenomenon because that creates at least the illusion of a race against Hillary Clinton. At the same time, we don't want to look too closely at his positions or the controversies or the things that he has said or has written that would cause a huge explosion if it were any other candidate, because that spoils the fun. Nobody wants to knock him out too early. Now, I'm not defending this. I think if given the reaction that Sanders has gotten, that we ought to take him seriously and we ought to cover him with the same aggressiveness as we cover Hillary or any other candidate. That doesn't seem to be happening. It might change, I suppose. In the Hillary camp, seems to be kind of downplaying him. Yes, we could have a tough time in Iowa and or New Hampshire, but Hillary, as you'll notice when she's asked about Bernie Sanders, as she was in that CNN interview, not mentioning him by name, not trying to give him any oxygen. So I think that we can't have it both ways. Either Sanders is doing really well, deserves coverage, and therefore deserves the same scrutiny that we give other presidential candidates, or he's just an entertaining factor, in which case we ought not to give him all that much attention.
So he says, if we took Bernie serious, the media would have to scrutinize his positions. Now, here's why they don't want to scrutinize his positions. A, well, they realize that his policy proposals actually work, because taxing the rich stimulates the economy and universal healthcare reduces deaths. And two, this would contradict the failed policies of establishment Democrats and Republicans, who the media is in bed with. So they don't want their buddies to be contradicted by Bernie's actual, real, substantive policy proposals that will actually fix the problems with America. So now he can't say much about Bernie Sanders' policies because they're hugely popular. So what does he do instead? Well, he tries to assassinate Bernie's character by bringing up a debunked study that Bernie cited decades and decades and decades ago. Because, I mean, look, if you can't critique them on their policy substance, well, then you gotta go for their character. And that's what they're doing. This is a character assassination attempt. And it's very, very overtly obvious. Now, he also says this would have been a bombshell if any other candidate had written this, which he's referring to Bernie's citing of the study that says that orgasms can reduce the risk of cancer. Really? Because your guys' standard for bombshells is really weird then, because we just found out that Rick Santorum, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, well, they were accepting donations from white supremacists. Scott Walker recently implied that gay men are pedophiles. Mike Huckabee called for an American theocracy. Jeb Bush has Paul Wolfowitz as one of his advisors. Now, this is the guy who helped start the Iraq War. I don't know if you remember him or not, but he's the guy whose policy idea, which was to invade Iraq, it led to the death of 200,000 people. So I don't think he's going to remember these things, but the fact of the matter is that if these things aren't bombshells, but Bernie Sanders citing a stupid study is, well then, I don't know what your standard of judgment is there, and I don't know how you apply it, because you seem very inconsistent. Why aren't you attacking your buddies on those issues? I think that's a lot more controversial than somebody citing a study 40 years ago, which, by the way, is double the age of most of us who will be voting in the upcoming election. So, nice try there. Now, I want to go over one more point. He says, quote, "We should be covering him with the same aggressiveness as any other candidate." Well, have you not been watching the mainstream media? Because I've covered multiple segments where they just try to demolish his character. I mean, they are covering Bernie Sanders with the same aggressiveness, if not more, because they don't even take him seriously at all. And I think that's a really great way to kind of dismiss a candidate. Graham Gutfeld recently called Bernie Sanders a dope and said that he's so nutty that kids should be allergic to him. Come on. So, of course, they're scrutinizing Bernie Sanders, probably more than any other candidate. But what's the takeaway? Look, they're scared of Bernie Sanders. There's not a single other candidate that actually threatens the establishment. But look, it doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. At the end of the day, the mainstream media outlets, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, well, they all want an establishment candidate because they're all in bed with the establishment candidates due to money in politics. You see, when the Koch brothers funds Jeb Bush's campaign or a lot of other senatorial races or gubernatorial races, guess who benefits from those political attack ads? CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They benefit the most. They get all that money. So do you think they want an anti-establishment candidate who's actually going to get money out of politics? Of course they don't, because this is going to threaten their bottom line. Bernie is a direct threat to their business, and business as usual will change if Bernie Sanders is elected, and they're scared of him. They're scared of this. So if the Democrats and Republicans, if they actually want to galvanize the people like Bernie Sanders has been doing, well then I have some advice for you. Maybe adopt policy proposals that we actually want, maybe not be so corrupt. There's an idea, because there's a reason why Bernie Sanders has so much momentum and he's so hugely popular right now. It's because he's not corrupt. He's maybe one of 3 or 4 non-corrupt politicians in Congress. It's because he's proposing things that we actually want. We want universal health care. We want a raise to the minimum wage. We want to get money out of politics. Even a majority of Republicans want that. So look, this, again, is another stupid attempt to discredit Bernie Sanders by using an ad hominem attack. Now, we all do ad hominem attacks. I just recently attacked Anthony Weiner for sexting and tried to discredit his character that way. But what I really just want to do is point out to you what the media tries to do and really illustrate, or give you an example, moreover, that illustrates how they try to discredit politicians. Because the media really controls the political narrative. If they want to, they can discredit a candidate. But seeing that they're not powerful enough to discredit Bernie Sanders because he's so hugely popular and this is a grassroots effort, that scares them. And I love it. I love watching it unfold.